Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to the first meeting of the Planning Commission, January 11th, 2018. The first item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. Wait,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Perry?
Aye.
Thanks. Quorum rules. All right. The next item is approval of the minutes, and given the space that we had, it's from November 9th, and I unfortunately wasn't there.
So you're going to have to defer. I should have
Just
made-
defer?
I should have realized that. It may take a time, and before you have the four who were there to be able to vote on it.
So
depending-
that's how that needs to work.
It's how most people choose to make it work. I've been told by some that it doesn't take that, but I think
Hey.
it's preferred.
No problem. All right. Then the,
Just note that, read him, didn't seem like it captured it fine.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
excellent.
Aye.
You all set there, Perry?
Yeah, I'm trying to watch it live on the laptop and then listen to it, and they're not perfectly synced, so bear with me.
Yeah, that's going to be, there's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah, turn off the audio on his computer.
Yeah, so if nothing else, turn off the audio on the machine.
Yep.
So, all right, the fourth item is any disclosures relating to potential conflicts of interest on any item on the agenda.
And maybe for the benefit of your newest member, this is something that could just be explained as a relatively new addition to the agenda at Jamie, the former chair's suggestion. Just in the event we were talking about something that you felt you had a conflict, you are under our ordinance. Since this is not a quasi-judicial board, you can still consider things, but you would disclose your conflict.
Got it.
Not likely tonight.
Right, not likely. Actually, before we move on, I apologize. I even had a note and I skipped right over it, but want to welcome our newest member.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Susanna, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Susanna, welcome.
Thank you.
We're
Happy
looking
to be
forward
here.
everything.
Great.
Very cool. Okay, so no disclosures. The next one is open to the public, and seeing no other members of the public, I think we're good there. Then as far as subcommittee matters, we have some new appointments to the Energy Subcommittee. I think we just need to formalize it, right? For Tim and
If you
Neil?
wanted to make them formally, if you haven't done that so far, if you had, then you could announce them.
Yeah, I think that they've, I think they accepted. We just needed to formally appoint Tim and Neil. So is there a particular language that I need to use, or is there a preference to hold for any
No,
reason?
there's, as I understand it, the chair has the ability to make these appointments, and you would just indicate that you had had that conversation with them, and they've agreed to serve. This is a committee that is seen to be not a standing committee. Its work will be done, and then they'll go away. So these folks will be in their positions until the job is done, and they've agreed to do that. And I would just
Yep.
say identify them by name, and we'll make sure that they get the email. I think that you might have started to do that.
Yeah, mostly my big question was, is it Tim, is it Gitterman?
Oh, I believe Gitterman. Yeah.
Gitterman. Okay, so Tim Gitterman and Neil Curtis, and we had a nice email thread. The just for disclosure, the first meeting of the Energy Subcommittee will be Monday, the 15th, at 7 o'clock in Meeting Room 2, which I think is this one, right? Or it's that one. You'd think I'd know that by now. So the Energy Subcommittee is going to get started, and so Monday we'll kick that off and determine the formal schedule and get going on that work, which is great.
We're at a total of 5 now.
We have a total of 5, so there's, yes, which is good.
Yeah.
And that the full complement is Judy Raven, Matt Dooley, John Pascarella, I believe, and Tim and Neil.
Correct. And then Jeff Loiter is ancillary, not formal, but will have some contributions. All right. there's no any official wording that needs to happen before then, aside from what's been done, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, cool.
And was Chris Nemi also, he was going to be on call?
He wanted, particular task-oriented thing. So if we had a particular discrete chunk of work,
Yeah.
that we could potentially ask him, and he could do that.
Okay. Yeah, Chris is a former member of the Planning Commission and was a select board member and, yeah, energy guy.
Excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
What was my first choice of who to get on that? So yeah.
and I will say, really encouraged with the response, and really looking forward to getting going on that. Okay, so next item is a comprehensive plan update. The first part was a presentation around plan layout and graphic design options, and did we want to walk through the presentation or start by introducing Maya? And
I think we can introduce Maya and then turn things over to her.
fantastic. All right. And I apologize, I don't have your last name in front of me. Smith. It's hard to remember. All right. Well, Maya Smith, thanks for being here. And yeah, the floor is all yours.
Okay, well, Dean called me.
Oh, would you mind the microphone?
You can use the wireless, please. Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe I can just segue.
Oh, sure.
Maya is a graphic designer whose work I've been familiar with going back many, many years. And I was aware of the fact that the town of Essex, as part of their town plan update, they had hired someone to assist in the graphic design of the document. And I had even known at the time that Maya had been hired, but then I forgot. And then time went by and their plan was completed, and that plan was nominated for an award, and it won the award as the Municipal Plan of the Year. That's an award granted by the Vermont Planners Association. And then when the conversations had started here about the need to improve the design of the plan, things started percolating, and then Jamie had expressed an interest in the time before he switched from this body to the select board in making part of the request related to the budget. So when I submit my budget to the select board, he suggested the idea that it include some funding that could go towards hiring a graphic designer to assist with that. And then, since the response to that so far has been positive, it seemed logical to reach out to someone who had done it, someone like Maya. And since she's close, she agreed, and we've rescheduled a couple of times because of the quorum problem. But she has done this work for Essex. I see that she's got copies of the Essex plan. I have 2 copies of the Essex plan myself. Anyway, with that, I will be happy to turn things over so she can talk about who she is, what she does, how she did it in Essex, and so on.
Excellent.
My only copy, so I'll have to take it back.
Absolutely.
Hello. So yeah, I did the Essex plan with the community, economic and community, I'm not sure if I'm getting her title right, community director. Dana.
Community Development and Planning Director.
Okay. And we spent probably a year developing this together. And so it was really exciting that we got an award through the planners, the Vermont Planners Association. And then I hadn't heard from her for quite a while, and then she contacted me recently and said that Shelburne, my hometown, was interested in the possibility of doing something similar. So Dean and I talked a couple times, and he said, would you like to come and meet with the Planning Commission? And I said, sure. So here I am, and I don't really have a whole lot to present to you other than that I can tell you how we did it in Essex and how I've done other projects for all kinds of organizations. I actually brought a few other things if you want to just peruse through some of these documents just to kind of get a sense for my work and my style. I try to pick a variety of things. But I do work for a lot of conservation and wildlife organizations, nonprofits, and different large and small organizations, state, federal, pretty much all across the country. And so I really love working for local people too. It's harder to come by for some reason, but it's great when things come up. And I literally live about a mile away. So anyway, I could describe to you the process just really quickly. For designing something like this, it's a lot of back and forth, and the amount of back and forth really is dependent on, what works for you. But it starts off with a manuscript, and my understanding is that you're in the midst, or maybe about to start revising your plan. I'm not sure what. In the midst. Okay. And my understanding is that you're all taking a piece of it. Okay. So at the point when that is fairly well developed and, you're feeling really comfortable with it, you can share it with me and we can start to talk. I shouldn't just assume you're going to hire me. Sorry. I'll just tell you how I do it, and you can decide from there what you want to do. But generally what my clients do is share with me their document, and we start to talk about how to organize this graphically. And I often share some of my past work, and we look at they might have ideas coming from, things that they've seen. And once the document's really pretty solid and it's not going to need a lot of additional changes, then they hand it over to me and I start the design. This is after talking about, a general look and feel. What kinds of things does it need? How much, are we going to do a lot of mapping or, different kinds of graphics? Sometimes I have to spend a lot of time creating graphics. And then, how much photography are we going to use? Where are we going to get the photography? All that kind of stuff. And then I start the design, and then it's just a lot of drafts that we go through, maybe 3 or 4 drafts, whereupon I present something and then they give me feedback. And that at that stage, editing text is also totally fine as long as it's not crazy. And sometimes it does end up being more work than everyone expected. And then we talk about what that might mean. Sometimes we can fit it in the budget, sometimes no. It just depends. But normally that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time people have things pretty well developed. Then I also often take care of the printing. So I work with various printers and I can solicit quotes and just move the piece through production so that you don't have to worry about all that. And that entails reviewing proofs and just generally being the liaison with the printer and making sure that everything runs smoothly. And so far, I haven't had any problems, having anything come back and say, oh, this is all messed up. So, I do take that very seriously. It's not my favorite part of the job, but I take it very seriously, just meticulously checking things because it's a lot of money, and I want people to be happy with the final product. So, but that's what I do. I also design a lot of other things too, but I like all kinds of stuff. But reports and plans are definitely part of that.
So on the plan thing, a lot of this, it all looks awesome. I love the presentation.
Thank you.
Maybe a town question. I don't know if I wasn't sure how much of a budget was earmarked and how seriously we could entertain that sort of.
Yeah, we have to see how things survive the budget process.
Right.
That's so in a sense nothing has been budgeted so far, but when Jamie and I made the presentation, the response to the idea was pretty favorable. But I do note that the things are probably more intense in the budget than they've been in a few years. But I think that another factor is what the group has had discussions before about the plan being having less text volume, because there's a lot of material in the plan as it is written right now. 2 volumes plus maps and a separate document. You've talked about reducing that, and we're, I think, still wrestling with the question of just what is going to go in the plan, and the discussion of will the recommended actions be there or in a separate document and so forth. And I think that will have an obvious impact on the cost, because if the document is something that, if your goal is to keep it, say, under 40 pages, you're going to have a lot of work to do to get the material to that volume, so that we can then be turning things over and be fairly confident that it's not going to be a 60 or an 80-page document. And then you're either going to we'll have the budget to cover it, or you have to make the hard choices about what will be in and what will be someplace else.
Yeah, having spent a fair amount of time doing this kind of work, mainly on the internet, on the web, but project-based stuff. Like I was just thinking, all right, like working backwards in time. There's already not a ton of time.
Absolutely, there's the
so
issue.
We're working in it in piecemeal. So in terms of a design and production process, my guess is if we waited to be done to get it to you, that we'll never get it. That won't work. So we would probably have to start to think about, a design paradigm or kind of look and feel, and then start to feed you pieces and chunks that could be done. And it would probably have to be.
Yeah, and there are some communities that will take the approach that they'll make the design a separate and discrete step after the material, the content has gone through an approval process. And that's a conversation that we need to have, because in my mind, there's still a lot of stuff to take care of, and I don't want people going insane at the end,
Right.
dealing with design issues that are, in a sense, not dry. They're, the statutory requirements are not met necessarily by the design component.
Right.
You've said as a group you want the document that you ultimately have as the plan for the town to be, nicer looking than the existing one.
So we could be doing what we're doing, working, get it through the select board as a whatever's finally approved, then
You
have it live as an ugly document that's been approved, and then beautify it.
you could, and that's
Right.
not ideal.
Yeah.
If we were 6 months ago, I mean, I don't think we would really even worry about that, or 12 months ago. But where we are right now, I think you have to at least think of that possibility.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think just realistically, given not having quorum, the work we've still got ahead of us. If February 2019 is when it's
Yes,
due?
the current plan expires in February, and there's a whole other discussion about the implications of having a plan expire are not great, but
Right.
people will need to understand them, because some might say, when you get to October and you feel like you're just not going to make it, then you don't want to, arbitrarily force yourselves. You have two ways of looking at it, but one
Right.
is to say,
past something that doesn't work. That
yeah,
isn't-
we're
isn't quality.
gonna realize that we'll go 4 months and miss the deadline by 4 months, which will mean no bylaw amendments for 4 months, but that might not be the end of the world,
Right.
as opposed to something that you may compromise on and feel, because I think there'll be a degree of relief. Once you get it adopted, it's going to take a lot of discipline to keep working on it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where my head was going as well, that I love the format and looking through this, and we looked at some other plans as well that to give us an idea of flow and how we wanted to put this together. And I think we have an agenda item later to get into that a little bit. But from your perspective, if there's a loose framework that, as we're putting this together, if we agree that this framework would make it easier, so to speak, to compile in a format like this versus not, I guess that would be helpful to know up front. But I'm not quite sure what question to ask. I suppose as long as it's a structured document, you have something you can work with.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with so many different kinds of documents in different conditions, and one thing that I wonder about is how you think it's all going to come together in the end. Will there be one person that will go through it and kind of, I don't know if it's necessary or not, but maybe create a united voice, or at least have consistency in some of the writing structure. I'm not sure if that's important or not, but I was just wondering if there was one person who was going to kind of pull it all together after it's been pretty thoroughly vetted, but just kind of turn it into one piece. And the other thing I wanted to say is that as you're working on it, if you wanted me to do what I call a template, I'm not sure if that's really the best word for it, but to show you, I did this with Essex, to show you, maybe the first, it doesn't have to be the first, but to show you 10 or 12 pages and how we could design this, because that would help you to write. So, just to show you 10 pages, 12 pages, what it would look like, what are the components, would there be, sidebars and boxes of where you might have like these little tidbits of information. We did a lot of that in Essex. Call outs, whatever the case. I mean, there's a lot of different graphic elements that create the entire document. And so if I gave you something, maybe this winter, just to, we can establish a look.
Yeah, I think
based
that would
on-
be exactly where
Yeah.
I was going with that idea of being piecemeal. We have some sections that we're pretty
Yeah, if
well
you have a section
done
that's
with, and,
really,
and there's some small ones
in good
and
shape.
some pretty big ones. We could give you like a small section and a bigger section,
yeah,
and then do that. And I think you're right about, we have talked about kind of, it might be me, it might be like, I just have a background as a teacher and editor too. So like, we talked about maybe trying to bring that voice in, but also I feel like working by committee doesn't really work well in this kind of development paradigm as well, right? So I think there has to be someone, that was a note I wrote down, like who coordinates the, I think everybody has to ultimately approve it, but you probably want a single point of contact from a
Right.
design editing standpoint as well. Yeah, yeah.
Because
No,
I
it's-
was thinking it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think at some point we've got to just be like, all right,
yeah.
you've got
have
a single point of
person.
contact that's doing that, and we're kind of working through the, if you find some things that are wrong with the text, can kind of clean that up while also working with design standpoints.
And not to put it all on your shoulders, but it's great if a member of the commission can do that. I'll just offer as a slight contrast, the Natural Resources Committee, which has updated the open space plan. They found a graduate student, I believe, at UVM, or maybe recent graduate, and they hired an editor, so they got that single voice by going outside.
Yeah,
But if you don't need to do that, then great. But that's also a possibility.
How widely read are these printed?
Sorry?
How widely read are these printed plans?
How many even
are
exist? Do
people,
we have existing?
do people prefer to access them online?
Well, we have sold progressively fewer and fewer paper copies of the plan because it is available digitally, and there really isn't a whole lot to gain by having a paper copy given how plain it is. The Natural Resources Committee with the open space plan had very bold ambitions of printing large numbers. It's just that it's costly.
Sure.
So they haven't done that, but that's a question for the group to answer is what would you want to shoot as a target? For a document like this, though, it's not something that people put on their table, and it is expensive to print. So what the groups have tended to do is to just make sure that the key board members, so we would have, the color copies for the members of the select board, the members of the planning commission, members of the DRB, set a number as a first run. We do have basic color reproduction capabilities now that we didn't have before. But that's a question.
The other thing that
But the design,
a lot of
and the design would live online
Right,
in a
yeah,
much
that's
prettier
just
fashion as
what I was
well,
going to
right?
say.
So,
You would have you could have a downloadable PDF on your webpage, and which is great because it'll be exactly what the printed copy. It would look just like it. It's just you can see it on your screen, and that helps so much with having to save a lot of money on printing because you often people have to print a certain amount for something just to have and then they rely on the web for a lot of people's access to the document.
If it was a shorter document, I think people might fathom picking it up and reading the whole thing cover to cover. But the way it is right now, it doesn't people don't gravitate towards that. They tend to search it more, which is I think why people are happy to use the PDF versions. But if you get it to be smaller and more compact and people really like the way it looks, well then I think you create a demand for a paper product. But right now, people
Yeah, I
aren't.
mean, it doesn't invite reading at this point because it's big blocks and chunks of text. I mean, it's aesthetically really ugly.
It's
Even, on the web, no one reads that way, right? So, I mean, even just taking something like, and this is more web friendly as it is, in terms of,
It wasn't right. The structure that we've used in town for years is not something that ever contemplated cell phones, tablets, whatever.
yeah.
Are executive summaries a popular choice?
Well, that's another, it's a school of thought. Sometimes that's really the solution, is to do the document. My philosophy on the plans is that there are a lot of statutory requirements that the documents are required to meet. So you are writing the document, you have to say what you need to say, and you really shouldn't compromise on those just for the sake of the appearance. If you want something that's accessible, then think about creating a separate document that's like an executive summary. I think it
I've
happens
done that
some
a
of the
lot.
time. Yeah, it
Yeah.
happens some of the time. It's a little confusing for some people because some may think that's the plan, but it's not the plan. It's the surrogate for the plan. The legal document is going to be the bigger one.
I mean, I even liked on this one, honestly, just the beginning part in terms of purpose of a town plan,
Right.
history of planning in Essex, like gives you a good sense of context. When I moved here, I came from places that didn't have town plans, and sort of, oh, have you ever looked at the Shelburne town plan? Oh, what's that? You go online and sort of to have that sort of background and history is nice. It's definitely more accessible as well.
That's the hope. That's the hope. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really like this format, and I've been just kind of going back and forth and thinking about how we have things structured, and I'm always a fan of the priority is to get the content together. Like if you have content, you can work with it. If we're constantly challenged by the content and asking ourselves questions about how we want to arrange sections because of various differences, that gets a lot more challenging. But once we have a particular format, and as you pointed out, Andrew, we have a small section, we have a larger section that we can at least say these are relatively stable. We have a set format. If we eventually agree to say that we're going to have goals, objectives, and recommended actions, then there would be a pattern to how each section would go.
Yeah.
Seeing the Essex plan, and I know this is something that we were going to talk through anyway later, but and I don't want to deviate from the path that we've been going on, but how we have each individual section just sort of flows. I like how the Essex plan has broad chapters and then includes groups things together, color coded and all that.
It's all color coded.
it makes it just seem a lot more approachable and easier to flip through, instead of, as you correctly pointed out, ours feels a little dry.
Yeah, well, and also just the fact that all the action plan is right up front, all together pulled out
Right.
of each section. So ours reads like the section and then the action plan, and so that just pulls all
Yeah,
the
they have all
action.
the actions up front in like
Every action up
5 or
front.
6 pages. It's all together right there, so
Yeah.
you can just go right to it.
And I think that also could help to reduce the size of what we have now as well, if we do some of that consolidation, which could be a side benefit.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
And what you could do, you could think about like maybe having a separate document that has some of the information that you don't need in the plan, and that may not need to be designed. It could just be something that's accessible to everyone who needs to access it online. So, if you feel like you've got too much and you want to pare it down, you could maybe think about putting some of it into another place. And then you just have the most pertinent information in the main plan, and then it'll just be a smaller document.
I think our
Less-
challenge is we've got volume 1, which would be the equivalent of the the town plan here. And
Yeah.
then we've got volume 2 that's much larger and has a lot of the supporting data.
Okay,
that
so
we
that's
need
what
to
you already
tackle.
have, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh. And you would only want to design volume 1?
right.
Okay.
I would imagine.
Do you have a volume 2? I mean, that's kind of the premise I've been operating under. But before I continue with that, I just wanted to make sure that we gave Perry a chance to talk. And since he didn't get a paper copy, and for anybody who might be watching now or watching the tape, the Essex Town Plan is available on the Essex Town website. So if you Google Essex, Vermont Town Plan, you'll hit this page. And so the document that we're talking about is going to be up on the screen for anybody who's watching and doesn't have the benefit of looking at what you guys
Right.
were looking at. And I don't know if Perry, if he's on mute, because he did.
I can hear you. What was the question?
Well, just giving you a chance to ask any questions you might have had about the design, because you were in the unfair position of not being able to get a copy of this document that Maya's talking about. But if you go back on mute and you want to look online, if you just Google Essex, Vermont Town Plan or Comprehensive Plan, you will be able to find it. It's also up on the screen right now. And this is the document that your peers have the benefit of being able to see.
Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, my biggest concern is whether or not the town appropriates the money to be able to do this, and given how everybody is, focused on all the additional costs this coming year from the fire truck and
We just lost you.
if we don't have the money, it's a moot point, correct?
Yeah, that's true. I think what I'm happy to say right now, I love the way this looks. I'd be a big fan of heading down this path. Obviously, we'd be driven a little bit by budget decisions, but that wouldn't prevent us from continuing down the path of having something like this in mind as we're determining how much data goes into volume 1 and how we might put this together. And then as the budget unfolds, we can see what kind of funds are available and how much we could do with it.
Sounds good to me.
And
Yeah.
if you're a citizen of Essex, can you just pick one of these up, or do you have to pay for it? How's it work?
My guess is they charge for them, but
Yeah.
I haven't asked Dana to confirm that.
don't
Maybe
know.
have you heard?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking in terms of a budgetary thing. If we said, look, it exists online. If you want a hard copy, you can get one at the town office for
Yeah.
X, and you could at least cover some of the production costs. That would,
Be in the library.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Circulating.
Definitely
idea.
copies in the
Yeah,
library.
maybe 10 copies
Yeah,
in the, or
copies in the-
5 copies or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I can say that as a reference, it's a smaller document, but the new design guidelines that were updated, the updated design guidelines, essentially new design guidelines, smaller document, and that color per copy cost is about $25. So people can come in, if they really want one, we'll sell them spiral bound, acetate front cover, I think. This would be more, and I'm not sure what, but statute allows us to charge the cost.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's such a high cost, we would look for some way to subsidize it. I don't know, but yes, we would recover the cost for the copies that we sell. And I don't see anything just yet.
Big ad right there. Is that allowed? Ad sales?
Sponsored.
Sponsors, ad sales?
In the town plan.
Yeah.
Can't really imagine that.
Might be
but
tricky.
Get Archie's right here.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just makes me want to pick this up and read it and check it out, versus what we have, even editing it sometimes. I'm like,
yeah.
aesthetically, it's
and not only
overwhelming.
that, but just flipping through that, I saw people that I recognized and stuff, and that's the sort of thing where we're
In Essex.
yeah
Yeah.
that we're as we talk about what Kate's brought up about the sense of place and
Yeah.
really
Right.
incorporating that. I think that something like this that's tangible that that can help toward that end.
Yeah, in this case, we used a lot of photos, and it does do a good job with the photos, just really bringing the town to life. Like, this is our town. And these are our people.
And we're even more photogenic than Essex, right? So I mean, like,
What is your photo status? Do you have,
What is our photo status?
yeah,
I mean, do we have a photo library?
Yeah.
I guess I would say the short answer is no. The open space plan was produced with both donated and purchased photos. There are talented photographers in town, and
Yeah.
whether or not we would have to purchase them, I'm not sure, but
could also.
Weren't there a lot of
maybe-
photos taken for the website?
Yeah,
Paul Boisvert, who you may have heard of,
Paul.
I believe has worked some kind of agreement. I don't believe the town pays for those. But I think there are some restrictions on the use of those, and I think I
It's
just
just some really
noticed that there
nice
are
stuff.
some new photos. So there was one new photo, at least, when I opened up the web page today. But it's Paul's work, I believe, much of it is. I was going to just ask a quick question since I was going through this. There's a grant program that is called Heart and Soul. Was their product, was that a big factor in the preparation of their plan
I
and the
don't
material they gave you, or was it
I don't
kind
know.
of transparent to you? Or?
Yeah, we didn't talk so much about the heart and soul. I mean, I don't.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that.
Not something that came through. Okay.
No. I think they had that all figured out before they talked to me.
But it is interesting, their document, you have it in your hands, but at the intro, it says that the previous plan had been close to 200 pages. So their task was not unlike the one you folks have. Trying to
Yeah, it
winnow
was
things
it
down.
was sizable, and they spent a long time cutting it back. But then we did put a lot of photos in too, to dress it up. So yeah,
it's a lot shorter.
yeah.
For a rough idea, do you have a general idea of what a copy of this might cost from a printing standpoint?
It depends on a lot of factors. I mean, the main thing is page count, and that's 120 something.
Yeah.
I mean, I can look into it. I'd be happy to. I have a printer I talk to every day. I can just run it by him. But what it comes down to is the quantity.
Yeah.
So
If you can
There's
print
huge
1,000
economy.
copies,
Right, that's true.
Unit
Yeah.
cost will go through the floor, but until
right.
I guess, yeah, and I wasn't really thinking specific. I was just thinking order of magnitude. Like if we're talking about if we were going to do a run of, say, well, I'd be interested in just understanding what a minimum run might be for
Like 250 or 100. I mean, I don't know, like what would be a reasonable number.
in order to drive down the cost, or to
Well,
just
you wanted
just-
you
how many
wanted
think we'd expect?
Oh, I mean, I think that 50 would be probably a safe first run.
now the thing about doing 50
And
is
you're
that
gonna
you
be
might as well do
paying a
100
premium.
and pay like a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, that's especially in a low run like that. So yeah, I mean, it does become very expensive, but there could be some alternative ways of doing it.
yeah.
Of printing it, where it brings down the cost. So
And I'm mostly thinking that our big priority is to meet the February 2019 deadline and to make sure we have a plan. I think a lot of us would like to get to something like this, and I'm more asking to get a rough idea so that we can start thinking about how that might come to be.
Okay.
Like, for example, if a run of 100 of something similar to this was going to be, well, I don't know what it would be,
Yeah.
but how might we offset that? Should we do a contest for soliciting photos that could end up in the town plan or something that generates buzz around the final thing that people might be interested in buying that would justify having a certain volume? Just things like that, conceptually.
I was going to suggest having a photo contest actually, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that have some really good photos of
Yeah.
Shelburne, such a scenic town, and would love to have their photo in the plan, right? So that would be an easy way to collect a lot of photos. But yeah, and also to create some buzz, like you say. And, I mean, I don't know if the goal is to try to get people to buy it, but, I mean, you could do a nice, this is a perfect bound, professionally done job, and you could also do, spiral bound or wire bound or something like that with a acetate cover, and, you could look into options. And that's not terrible. There's nothing wrong with that. So, it also, depends on how many pages, again, and that would affect how they can bind it. The more pages, the more complicated it gets. So, another reason to keep the page count down.
And I think with the volume that we have right now, we definitely need to work on reducing the page count, and that was something we were wanting to do anyway.
Right.
Well, this is great. I'm certainly intrigued. I'm glad that you were here to be able to share this and that we could have a chance to take a look at it.
Sure. My pleasure. And just, I guess I'll just continue to talk with you, Dean, and just let me know how you want to proceed. And, if I can be helpful in terms of, like I said earlier, maybe do an initial few pages we can talk about.
Yeah. Something, that older document that I had up briefly was
Of
essential.
Essex, yeah.
Yeah.
And that had to be approved for the funding. We did it that way, I believe. I did just a handful of pages, and it had to go through a process of approval, and then eventually we did the whole thing. So, yeah.
Very good. Any other questions, or Perry, any comments from you?
I'm good.
Excellent.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
good deal. Appreciate it.
Was it you I saw running when it was really cold? I mean, I think I see you run sometimes,
Yeah.
but there was someone that kind of looked like you and it kind of waved, and you were wearing a balaclava. Okay, all right.
That's all yours.
Thank you.
These are yours, Dean?
Two of them are
Yeah.
mine, courtesy of the planner for Essex.
Fantastic. Cool. Thank you very much.
Good to have connection.
Yeah, right.
Dean, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Does the town, when you doing a major expenditure, or is there a certain cap at which you have to get bids from multiple vendors?
No, not, well, there hasn't been something like that. I would normally do that. We use, the Planning and Zoning Office so often uses grants to pay for these kinds of things, and those grants will have bid requirements.
By my-
So it's just customary for us to do that. I know that with the open space plan, the person who was the graphic designer for them had gone out and I believe had gotten 3 proposals regarding the printing costs and things like that. So it's customary. We don't have, or at least we haven't had for some time. I think that the manager's office has been developing something like a minimum threshold go out to bid, but there has not been a requirement for that. It's just good practice.
Yeah.
Does that apply to hiring a designer too at all, though?
There's nothing, in my estimation, there's nothing that would stop the planning commission if you had $5,000, $10,000 in the budget for next year, approved by the voters, and it was for the design of the plan. I don't believe there would be anything that would stop you from sole sourcing it.
Right. I didn't ever ask her. One of my questions I was going to ask was just the fee structure. Is it, fixed bid? Is it time? And
I think that would be something that could
Right.
be negotiated. I do believe I have a copy of the agreement. I don't remember it, but I believe Dana sent me a copy of the agreement that they had signed, and it's most likely going to reflect wherever the source of the money.
right.
Where did the money come
a lot
from?
of editing to do though, that she sort of suggested that.
Yeah, I mean that's what made me think it was sort of time based. Like the more we're churning, the more the cost goes up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So that kind of dovetails nicely into the plan format issues,
It does.
which I really like the look and layout of the Essex plan, and I was focusing on how they had their sections laid out. As I'd pointed out, they had like we have our goals, objectives, and recommended actions, and they do the same thing. I didn't see it the first time I flipped through it because of the way the sections are laid out. They kind of pack all of the ones that have. Now I'm not even seeing it.
They're all in the very front. So it's in the blue colored pages there.
Oh, right. Yeah, I do like that. Yeah, we'd really well. So I guess going back to the idea of having content, if we took our plan of the goals, objectives, recommended actions, and then we have all the text around it, I suppose to abstract that and get it into a format like this, we would need to. Each section effectively has the goals, the objectives, and then the recommended actions. All of the text that supports that is just sort of even interwoven into those areas, right?
Interwoven in theirs or
In ours.
in
currently.
ours there's usually a paragraph under the title for the section, and then the goals, objectives, recommended actions, like you said. There's a lot more narrative material in volume 2. And the way I had looked at it is, since it seemed clear that we weren't going to try to continue volume 2, that the type of information, not necessarily the words that are in there now, but that type some of it would be imported into the plan. So, if we're talking about housing, cherry pick the topic sentences from 2 or 3, just pull them in, and that's going to be the starting point for that additional material beyond the goal, the objective, and the recommended action. And then, the other thing too is just, and we'll get to this in a second, is that there are so many tables, there are so many charts, there are so many things that we could put in there. It's going to be tough to make the decisions, I think, unless you look at a document like Essex and you say, I like the idea, mimic it, or plan on, for the starting of the discussion relating to housing. I don't know which tables they have, but if there are 2 or 3 tables and charts, at the very least think that we want to make sure that we have that same information. Maybe it'll be formatted differently, or it will take a slightly different slant, but there are too many things to try to pull into this new plan. But if you haven't spent time with volume 2, I included, because it's so long, I did not copy it. I included the title, table of contents page, but I don't want to shortcut the discussion of the goals, objectives, and recommended actions, and maybe more specifically, how comfortable is this group regarding this question about recommended actions? Do you want to have a preliminary decision regarding what Essex has done, and that is to put the really important recommendations all in one place, and it's going to be in the front. And so as you are going through these individual sections, you'll know that the key ones are going to be brought to the front. That kind of ties into this larger discussion of, well, will recommended actions be included in the plan, or will they all go in a separate document?
Yeah, I think, at least for me personally, I might want to spend a little time with this one, just thinking about it. But I really like the simplicity of having, well, in their case, they have goals, general policy, and then actions, which is aligned with what you had included in the packet from the state. But if you have that, when we talk about simplifying, this first section is essentially the succinct version of that simplification. That's the, hey, this is what's state mandated. This will give you the gist of what it is that we're laying out. And then you can read on if you wanted to get the background.
Yeah.
Which the way we're currently structured, we have volume one that effectively does that. It's just a lot more, it's a lot larger.
Yeah.
And then we have volume two that just really has a lot of supporting content in there. And I agree. I think it's a huge challenge to really squeeze all that down into this kind of a format, given the timeline that we have.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be worth
And
a shot.
I should say, I don't know that it's going to be helpful to think of squeezing down volume 2 into volume 1. I think it's to look at a document like the Essex plan, see how the goals, objectives, and recommended actions really do carry over into that, and then just understand what are the types of information that are going to be most interesting, most revealing, and then ask yourself, well, is that already in there? Is it in volume 2? And there's a chance that it is, or something like it is, and that can be the starting point for the real version that we make of that chart.
So was there, from previous conversation and given the agenda item with the goals, objectives, recommended actions, I think, was the main concept of, do we want to pull them all out and have them separate, similar to what Essex had, or were we talking about more just limiting or putting specific guidelines on each of those sections as to what they need to look like so that we can start gaining consistency across sections?
I don't know that there was much in the way of consensus other than the possibility of making it shorter, and there are so many recommended actions that perhaps they could go in a separate document. I think it also said that back several years ago when the plan was being updated, there was an attempt made to take all the recommended actions, put them in a separate document that was going to be more like an implementation document. And so we had all of the recommended actions, and we had who was primarily responsible. We had the timetable. It was more of a management device, and it ran about 40 pages. It was really much too much. But the statute does talk about having implementation devices, and so I think the idea of perhaps pulling them out or winnowing them down so that you, instead of having 10 recommended actions, you might have 2 or 3 of the most important ones, and those are the ones that for that particular section or topic are going to be in the front.
Yeah, like in here, they appear to, doesn't seem that they have more than 6 actions for any given section. Or 14 in some cases. Yeah, I wonder, because I think fundamentally from satisfying the state requirements for what we need to include in the plan, which effectively is that section 1 that has that. If we focused on that aspect and really for each section saying we have a goal and objective and a set of recommended actions, and here they go up to 14 for some of the sections. So and I know that in some areas we get a little carried away, but I don't know how much volume that would add. If we really just strip that out of what we have right now, I don't think that it's not a massive document. We have a lot of supporting data in volume 1 currently, so we might have to make some tough choices on what we want to include there or not.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think you're also going to take a second. We'll probably take a second and even a third pass of
yeah.
editing going through. So we have 14 now, say, in one section.
Right.
As we move it to the front, you're like, and then so I think everything's going to continue to shrink a little bit.
agreed.
Because if you're pulling it out to the front, you're saying like this is critical.
Mm-hmm.
We've just thrown some things in there because that's the place to put it. I think when you're pulling the recommended actions to the front, you're probably going to make a harder line on whether it needs to be noted. And then, the only thought I had was as you go back here and then you read a certain section, it'd be interesting if, I don't know if they do it anywhere, but having like a pull out with the recommended actions related to this, so you see all the recommended actions here and then you're reading the section. Sometimes it's hard to remember maybe what you saw in between. So either that or, recommended actions on page whatever. So you could sort of toggle back and forth. Be able to cross-reference would be nice.
And that would be the benefit of an online document if you included links and
Yeah, you
things
could
to
hyperlink
that.
back and forth, absolutely.
Yeah.
Be more readable, actually, probably that way.
Although I'm sure labor intensive. It sounds like what Maya does is a static document,
Right.
creating that dynamic toggleable
Right.
plan online, although appealing.
Is a step beyond. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be.
Oh, that'd be super cool.
And that gets into
intro.
really defining the usability,
Right.
how the document would be used.
And what's the goal? Who's the audience?
Because we've talked in the past about how if you have a developer and they want to see, okay, what's Shelburne's view on this? Obviously, there's a regulation side, but if there's somebody who's trying to plan ahead and wants to see out of the town plan, what's the vibe that I'm getting here in a particular area? And as far as that use goes, you could go to this section 1 and just get that gist. And if you wanted more information, you could go and read about how the other sections are laid out to address those topics.
Yeah.
I don't know that you'd necessarily be flipping back and forth in that case.
Yeah, I think it will depend on the user. Developers will look at these. They are they're going to be paying a lot of attention to the map, and sometimes they'll look at the plan or they'll look at the zoning. The plan might give them some indication of where the zoning might go if they don't like the way that it is at present. So I'm kind of interested to hear what people make of the map and the presentation of the future land use piece, because that is an important element. The plan is ultimately answering the question, how should we grow? And when you look at the statutory requirements, the first substantive one is the land use plan. It consists of a map and the language that basically lays out where different types of land use activities are going to take place. Essex has chosen to do that after the policies, and that's not at all unusual. But I'd be interested in just people's feelings about how prominent the future land use map should be.
There's is half a page.
And the thing is that there's a full-size version, 3 feet by 4 feet, probably printed out somewhere because people are looking at it, or PDF version. And
I mean, if that's what people care most about, I would make it pretty prominent.
oftentimes the question is, what zone am I in, or what district am I in, or am I in the same one that I was before? That's also a key question. Just thinking in terms of the agenda, though, and are we segueing enough into the agenda items having to do with goals, objectives, recommended actions? I don't know how much or if any type of decision needs to be made, but I think the sooner the group can start to lay out what the plan of attack is going to be regarding those things, it could be helpful. And I did want to also just expose people to volume 2 a little bit, and not indicate that something like it has no purpose, but maybe there's a better format for it and there are alternatives, and then just show some of those to you, or at least one of them, if people feel.
Sure. I think just, to close out the first topic, I think just recognizing that we're a partial commission today, I wouldn't want to make any firm decisions, but I think based on the discussion, it sounds like there's at least, I'll speak for myself. I don't think that pulling out the goals, objectives, and recommended actions into its own front section, I don't think that's a bad idea. And I think that would simplify, it would enable us to consolidate that into a format that is easily digestible and kind of sets up the rest of the content. But at the same time, I think it's going to create a big chunk of additional work, because currently we've got the plan broken out, and you've done a great job of pulling out section by section for people to work on Google Docs and that sort of thing. But if we're actively editing those sections and we're pulling out the goals, objectives, and recommended actions into their own section, then you're
Starts
not
to go
necessarily
haywire.
linking, so that if you change in the updating section, you're not automatically changing section 1. So there would have to be some back and forth a little bit,
Yeah.
which could get tedious.
Yeah.
Yeah, the process has definitely got to be, but I think we've been working on sections. I think as we decide that a section is done,
Absolutely.
then we pull that piece out, and then even that at point can be, section could go to, if Maya was our designer, it could go to Maya to start to be, looking at, all right, how would you lay out the rest of this section here?
Yeah, and you can even have. I guess it's not that bad because you could have our draft section 1 that has the consolidated goals, objectives, and actions, and anything that section has been completed, you could make that a certain color to say, hey, this is green, this is good to go, we're not touching it. And the other ones, you could still pull out what we have from the plan today as placeholders, and then just replace them as we formalize sections.
I think of this
It's not that
newly
bad.
edited document, it's all new. You just pull things from it and it becomes, it's the refined product, whereas the things that you are marking up are the, preliminarily refined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't go into
That's not
this
so
new
bad.
document until you've decided
Yeah, you're
done.
you're copying into that new document the stuff that really is good. It doesn't really change the old document. The good stuff is in the new document.
Yeah, it just requires some discipline to then, should you decide you need to tweak it any further, it has to be tweaked in that, where it's been moved. I mean, that's what you're worried about, right? Is you then go back to
Yeah,
that
like I don't want to end up in a spinning
Co-
wheels, just
similar copy
yeah,
in two
lots of
places.
overhead.
Yeah.
But I think the more I think about it, I think that's manageable. I wouldn't want to make a formal decision without Asim, Dick, and
I understand,
Kate. But overall, it couldn't hurt as an exercise just to pull those goals, objectives, and recommended actions out to look at what that outline might look like.
Yeah, I think it would be fun to pull together
Yeah.
soon and just,
And then
know.
as we complete sections, we can say, all right, well, if housing is done, then you could just take those and housing, okay, these are the ones that it's going to be. The other ones are going to be updated. But I think that'd be good to see. So I just wanted to close that out. So as far as volume 2, did you want to?
Well, the other funny or odd aspect of this is that years ago, volume 2 was volume 1. And so that in terms of the document, when you picked it up, the first thing at one point in time was you picked up the narrative and you were expected, I guess, to plod through that before you got to the goals and objectives and recommendations or recommended actions, which is just kind of odd, or seems odd now that we've gone to this other approach. As I mentioned, just wanted to. I'm sorry, it's on the desktop. The thing about volume 2 is that I kind of latched on to the idea that we were not going to be continuing it because there's a lot of work involved in trying to create it. And it's also just very, very plain. It has the table of contents. I think one of the more useful pieces of some parts of it are interesting. They tell the story of Shelburne, and I think it is useful to have the history piece, but typically the history section in a comprehensive plan doesn't have a huge impact on policy or what those goals and objectives and recommended actions, but people like to know the story of the community. What I think is really important is, there's in the land use section, the information about the natural resources, although a lot of that can be addressed through the maps. But the stuff that I'm leading up to are the demographic pieces and the information about what the Shelburne population is doing and the housing demand. And those are the kinds of things that tend to drive the policy language. And in the time I've been here, I have seen it ebb and flow, but this kind of chart seems to have a lot of people feeling like Shelburne has just been utterly transformed in terms of its population, and they're wary about that. So this is where sometimes understanding, what our numbers are relative to the county as a whole and to other towns can be useful. But my point basically is that the demographic information can be very, very useful. Big picture stuff like what is the source of our growth? It was for the first time between 2000 and 2010 that the source of the growth in Shelburne was in migration rather than natural births over deaths, people here. And that's expected to continue as people's family sizes go down. That has implications that plans can try to start to address or at least recognize. Housing is another area. Economic development is another area. Although economic development is one of those things where you're looking, the data for jobs and employment and things like that are a little bit trickier to get on a town by town level where, and also because the employment is so different now, it's just covered employment doesn't necessarily work as a good indicator of what's going on in terms of the economy in Shelburne. But anyway, those are things that I think are interesting to people, and they have the population pyramids. They have the tradition of being included in these volumes, but I'm not so sure that they mean that much to people on the Planning Commission. But you should just know that that kind of material is there. This is a chart that it was an attempt, and it's pretty out of date. It's very, very, very out of date. That attempted to give some idea of what the future growth, so it was a snapshot of approved projects and how many of the lots in the approved projects had permits issued, and so what the expected growth, looking out from 2013 to 2017. That was because there was concern about how quickly Shelburne was growing. That was a table that people felt was important to have updated and included in the plan. There's that kind of stuff. It doesn't directly respond to anything in statute about the contents of the plan, but some people think, oh yeah, that's telling me something really important about Shelburne.
So this is the actual Volume 2 document right now?
Yep.
And that went through 2017 though.
Because it was right. This was done as part of the 2014 update.
Is that projection? Gotcha. Sorry.
Yeah.
Missed that.
Oh, sorry. Other things I might have said about this economy, I mentioned that earlier. Transportation is another area where you can get at a lot of it with maps. Public utilities and facilities like the water system, and I'll talk about those things later, so I guess I'll put that on hold. Energy is another section that in the past
So much of it's duplicative of Volume 1, though, too, right? So
well, Volume 1, in my estimation, doesn't have the data.
Yeah.
And so what
but the narrative chunks here, there seems to be some
there's
some overlap a little
yeah.
bit. Right?
And I think that there's not a problem with getting rid of Volume 2. You might want to, look at some of the pieces of Volume 2 and see if you've captured everything, or maybe you're leaving something out that wasn't written in the Volume 1. In some communities, when they'll do a plan, they'll do a Volume 1 like we've done, and they won't do a narrative. They'll have 30 or 40 tables and charts. It's just an appendix of charts. There's not a real problem with that.
And these guys in Essex chose to just, where they felt like it was appropriate, back some things up with data. But I would say generally there's just
Narrative.
mainly narratives and maps and pictures.
Yeah, it's very selective, and I guess what
Yeah.
I'm saying is that it's harder than it looks to get to the ones that you
Like
feel
what's
like
critical.
that really are going to support what it is you're trying to say. That's the bottom line, I guess.
But I agree with you. I mean, some of the things you pulled out, some sense of the population curve is something that I could see would be valuable to a town plan. You've got to understand where you've been to understand where you want to go.
Yep,
And
and the
then-
projections, and that's something that Perry has,
Yeah.
he and I have talked about.
Yeah. And those, the projections of, what the DRB has already approved or is, it's definitely data people like to know about.
Yeah, and yes, so this is something that you can flip through. I think at this point you have the sense of it. Energy was a section that was quite extensive at one point. then it has been cut back, but as we are tasked with having more information addressed about energy, we'll be pulling that into volume 1, although I don't think that there's much of anything that's in the current volume 2 that will be helpful.
And their new subcommittee will be
Sorry?
working on that, a lot of that section as a group in conjunction with you, because you own that section from
Yeah.
our standpoint, yeah.
I mean, the outline is there, but then in terms of supporting data and just getting input from professionals in the community as far as what might we want in the town plan that we could then bring back to the commission for consideration.
Yeah.
I do think that's an important topic. I comment on volume 2. When I first just wanted to try getting up to speed on the town before I took any interest in this kind of stuff, I thought that was an amazing document. And kudos to the commission that put that together. That's a lot of information. Not light weekend reading necessarily, but it's really educational to understand the history of where do we come from, where are we going, and it would be a shame to lose that. But what I'm wondering is, maybe this is something where we focus on meeting the state objectives and everything else in a volume 1 that's smaller, and we retain that, but then maybe keep that and slowly update it, and then in the next town plan revision, have it into a state where it could be its own addendum or incorporated into a larger document in a more creative way.
Yeah.
Because I don't see us under the timeline that we have now, being able to do this justice.
That's kind of how I feel. I wanted to do two things. I wanted to mention that there is one piece of this, the last chapter, the plan compatibility, which does respond to a statutory requirement. It's kind of where we tucked away this material because it doesn't mesh necessarily with all of the other stuff in volume 1, but it will need to be addressed. It's basically an assessment of how our vision and our future land use map meshes with the communities that surround us. So if you just imagine a situation, let's say Shelburne was a town that pursued economic development at all costs, and our zoning map was just uniform industrial development, commercial development all around the town, including the edges. And let's say we had rural communities like Charlotte, and on the other side of the line, they've got land designated as rural. And from a planning perspective and the statutory perspective, there's an incompatibility there. And so this section is responding to a requirement that says the towns need to assess the compatibility between their plans and their neighbors' plans, and if there's an incompatibility, to talk about how you would sort that out. So anyway, that's why it's there. We'll get into regional approval later, but it's something that does come up. The other thing I wanted to say, and I think I had included some of this material, is that I think the information that's in volume 2 is really helpful. There are perhaps new and better ways to present some of this stuff, and there's something called ECHOS is the term that was created for the regional plan when they scored a major grant. And the Regional Planning Commission is a public agency that has statutory responsibilities for regional planning and transportation. And they have this online device called the ECHOS scorecard. The ECHOS plan was the plan that they prepared. And this is a PDF version, which I created because for a time the web was down, but let's just see if I can. But I think it may be the way to think about sort of like the volume 2 for the 21st century. And I think when you see it live, it just has a bit more appeal. It did come back online, but it was really slow.
I think stuff like that was really, while that loads, it is really interesting to flip through, and there are certain things that jump out at you when you see consolidated stuff, some good, some scary.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a platform, I guess you'd call it, for a lot of data, and it's on a county level, but this sort of thing could be done for the town. And the way the RPC, they update it every year, and so you can see a longer and longer period of time, in a format that's a bit, easier to navigate, flip through, just see things quickly. I just wanted to cite it as an example, with a lot of this demographic information about natural systems, and not just where things are, because a lot of what happens in a document like Volume 2, particularly when it comes to natural resources, is it's saying where things are. And that's really important, because the statutory responsibility is to inventory. It is to tell people where those things are, but also to say why they're important and what's happening to them. How are they changing? And if the way they're changing is bad, then we can have policies that address them. And there's a bit more of a systems view in this, but it has these measures that seem to be, that resonate with people. Acreage of wildlife habitat lost. So it's not just saying where's the map, where are those wildlife habitats in Shelburne, but it's telling us what the
Can you
trend
open
is.
that one up?
Yep.
Just curious at what the trend. I kind of like the way they've done it with flat versus.
Yeah. Now
down.
the downside, and they try to enhance it by having these paragraphs of additional information. The downside is, it's just one source.
And you got only 2 data points on that one, right? The population growth was more interesting. 'Cause
Well, the National Land Cover Data Set,
it looks like it's a 5-year
so this
gap,
is
so
the
it might be another one coming
2001.
up, and
Yeah, so they have,
I'm assuming there's a 2016
Right,
data
so they-
set eventually.
this particular source gets published every 5 years with 5 years or something like that. It just puts a lot is riding on your selection of your data source. It's not just the fact that it may be 2 data points and you look at this and you
Yeah.
go, oh wow, but it's just 2 points.
Yeah.
Not all the data sources are equal, but you'll choose the best one. Anyway, this is just something to be aware of, and I suggest that, maybe longer term, this is where a document like Volume 2 would go, the direction it could go, because it might, if someone is going to be entering into a spreadsheet somewhere, the next column of information being added, it's not necessarily very appealing and attractive, but these platforms can make it visually interesting.
And what would it take to port that to a town?
It's a good question.
Is it just a filter?
Well, this
I mean,
result,
they have the information in the background.
yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was
Melanie
broken down
Needle,
by town.
who was here to talk about energy, I think she at the RPC knows more about this than probably anybody else.
Right. I mean, if they don't have it at the town level, they don't have it. That's what I'm wondering. Is it all aggregated at the county level, or how discreet did they go?
Yeah. I think of it as a model, not necessarily that. Well, I mean, I think it could be explored with them. Is there a way of slicing the data down to a town level?
Well, I'm just thinking more from the standpoint that is, live, quote unquote, and regularly updated versus a static document that's written every 5 years
Right.
and sits still.
Yes.
That as every year in between, if it's a platform like this, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's really I was thinking about not saying it. That's really I think the advantage of this is it's more like an indicators report where you plug in the numbers every year and you are more up to date, and you are not just waiting for 5 years or 8 years, what'll be in the future, to then go back and see, well, what's been happening.
Is that what our news cycle is? 8 years?
When the new plan is adopted, we will then fall under the new law, which says 8 years. So
I think that makes this tool more important, right? Because that's a big.
I think you're
A lot
right.
happened. I mean, think about 8 years in the life of a Chittenden County town is.
Yeah, and there are different responses to that. There are some people who say it needs to be 8 years because it just towns are constantly working on their plans, and not necessarily the case. It's 8 years, but it doesn't mean that a town couldn't be on its own self-imposed 4-year cycle.
Yeah.
Say.
Right.
So anyway, that was just the stuff I wanted to expose relating to volume 2. And be happy to answer any questions.
At the bottom that said powered by Clear Impact.
Yeah,
that
I
the
think
group?
that's the clearimpact.com scorecard. Yeah, that's who these folks are. And I've seen some other things kind of like it. Some might even be like kind of open source, but they're not as slick as this.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, are you suggesting that that would be available as a possibility?
I'm not trying to suggest that it would be available,
Okay.
but I'm trying to suggest that something like it may be the direction that we'd want to take it in, and so that if people felt like, yeah, this volume 2 stuff, static for 5 years or 8 years stuff is like not what we want, it's a direction to head in. We would know it's the direction to head in, and then we could start to explore, well, what would it take
Right.
to do that?
And then what, we create a data subcommittee to keep it current?
Well, I think you'd have a contract with some vendor who's doing that data. You know, you just
Or the RPC carves out something that, I mean, I think we're not alone in thinking something like this would be beneficial.
Absolutely, and certainly worth exploring. I really did like flipping through those just to get the snapshot. I think that'd be great at a town level with certain metrics all consolidated.
You want to talk about schedule?
Yes.
and sections that Jamie had, who owns them now.
Yeah,
and all
that
fun
too. And
stuff.
actually,
Did he do anything yet?
He had
My sense is he just delegated.
he's just on vacation
Yeah.
on the select board right now. That's all.
trying to think, I
I wish I had my glasses. Let's see.
included in the packets was the version that
It was-
been done before.
And you just shifted everything.
Oh.
Things are just
Oh,
Forward,
great.
over.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thanks.
Harry, this was, I believe, at least I hope that it was uploaded to the link. The link that's in the email that says, "Hey folks, this has been posted online." I believe if you click through to that, and you get to the folders for this meeting, that you will find this updated version of the schedule, or at least it's supposed to be there. But if not,
Okay, so schedule different from what's in the packet that was mailed?
yes.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
basically everything is shifted back one meeting because we didn't have the meeting on the 28th.
Right. Do you, Jason, want to talk a little bit about the session that you and I had about trying to figure, how we break this down? And I don't want to overlook Andrew's comment about the assignments, and I do have that someplace here. This old thing, and the fact that Jamie has gone and he was signed up.
Yeah, which I mean, this can be a quick discussion. The idea behind this was just to lay something out so that we could all have an idea of when we'd be talking about what topic for planning purposes and to be able to work around absences. So, for example, energy is we'll address that April 1st. That'll give the subcommittee some time to work on it. But if for some reason I wasn't going to make that first April meeting, then we'd need to horse trade with something else.
Right.
Are we theoretically supposed to be discussing public works and stormwater now? This is the Jan.
I've got a
1.
little spiel for later.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just making sure I'm reading this right. So then,
Yeah.
next, our second meeting of the month is growth, economic development.
Right. And then we have then housing being the first session in February. That will have given the housing subcommittee some time to work on the topic that they're working through,
Right.
so that we could have something. So we're trying to loosely align with the various workflows.
This is cool.
So with this, as long as it's definitely something for commissioners to take a look at, and if something doesn't align with an owner being available for that week, then we just need to know and we can work around it.
And since you mentioned housing, I mean, that the housing subcommittee has prepared their pamphlet or brochure that has a lot of information that's kind of in the vein of volume 2. They have not been assigned the task of the policies on related to housing. We didn't have a lead for housing, but I just wanted to mention that they were created and seemed not to be wanting to make, when they were created, they seemed not to be wanting to make policy recommendations their first, their reason for being. But anyway, if we assign a housing lead and that is how you want it to proceed, then we need to just make sure, because their focus right now is the hamlets.
Right, which the outcome of those discussions was going to feed into how we represented, what we might incorporate into the town plan as far as hamlets may go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking in terms of someone marking up the housing goal objectives, recommended actions, that hasn't, no one's been working on that yet. And for some of these topics, we've had the committees do a lot of that. And for some of the others, it's really been the individual commissioners. And
Do we have
I'm just
owners?
saying that if there was the expectation that the committees would work with that person, we just need to let them know.
Yeah, could we add a column for owners? Because, I was just thinking, I don't recall off the top of my head.
We certainly can. This is just the PDF version, but let me see. I think I have the calling them owners.
Yeah, I mean, even just
Leads?
initials. Lead,
Yeah.
lead probably is yeah. Because there's some where it's tag teamed or.
And this one was.
And maybe we could add something like this to our next get together. Something to throw out that might be valuable is converting this into a Google Sheet and giving commissioners the ability to comment, not necessarily edit, but comment.
Yep.
So if there's, say, the first session in February, housing, if somebody had comments around that or wanted to bring somebody in or whatever, you could just add a comment to that cell and everybody else could see it.
And actually, some of that I was now that I remember, I think, right, I had some indication of support committees there.
Yeah. I was just scanning, looking for owners more just to figure out who,
Okay.
Yeah.
what
what's
doesn't
missing?
have ownership, of
y-
things that are left.
Yeah, and topics that need someone are natural resources, housing, and telecom, towers and telecom. And I'm trying to recall,
I did reach out to Jamie, and he hadn't done anything yet on that, but
we're thinking maybe it doesn't need
yeah,
too much.
I don't think it needed a whole lot. I'm happy to.
So housing's the first
Housing is a biggie.
arriving one that's
Yep.
unattached. And what,
Ask what is the basic responsibility of the lead person on each of these topics?
you own kind of rewriting that section. Or, I mean, in some cases, the section
Just
is
edit.
pretty good as is, and it didn't take much. And so, like, I did
So it's just kind of cleaning it up, or is it?
well, and just, do we need changes?
Looking at-
does it still work? So, like, for the natural history, what do we call it? Historic cultural resources, we have this committee who works on that. I just met with them. They had driven a lot of it 5 years ago. How are you feeling about this? What changes? Here's some ideas I have of things I want to see. What are we, what could we add? And, out of that, it went from, I don't know, it was like a page and a half, and it went to about a page and two, like I
Okay.
added a couple things. It stayed about the same length. but
And
it
each of
changed
these
a little.
committees are existing working committees for the purpose of the plan or for the purpose of
It's a
planning.
mix.
Yeah, a mix of things.
There are, Shelburne has long had a natural resources committee,
Right.
a recreation committee,
Okay.
a paths committee.
Right. So some of
But-
those are underlying all of
And
these.
so the housing one has done a really cool deep dive on a lot of the data behind it, like where we
Yeah.
are, what's going on. It's a really, really cool document that was really helpful. And then we thought that that was really helpful. And so that's why we came up with this energy subcommittee to say, okay, in this town, we know there's a lot of thought leaders,
Bright
local,
minds, right, yep.
national people in this. Like, instead of Jason trying to figure it all out, let's get some experts.
Sure.
And, so that was sort of the thought, was where we don't have natural expertise, can we
Right.
find other people?
Right. Okay.
So the statutory requirement, and I will send this link out. What the statute says a housing element of a plan is supposed to include is this item 10, recommended program for addressing low and moderate income persons' housing needs. It goes on to say that as identified by the Regional Planning Commission, blah, 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 blah. The law spells out how municipalities plan. It spells out how the regional planning commissions plan. Towns do plans. The RPC does plans. They have their own requirements. One of the regional requirements is to do a regional assessment of housing needs. So the law contemplates that towns are not going to do their own independent housing needs assessments. The regional planning commission is supposed to do that. And the housing plan, the housing element of the town plan is supposed to say, oh, well, they say the town will need 500 housing units over a decade for low and moderate income persons. The theory is that the town's efforts are focused on, well, what should the policies be that will help us address those needs? You're not tasked with identifying the magnitude of the need, because that's supposed to come from the regional assessment. It's been a little bit, the regional effort in that area has been a little bit, like, I think, gone in ebbs and flows. But anyway, we would start by going to the RPC for their numbers.
And as far as spearheading a section, it maybe not as intimidating as it sounds. It's more going through and doing edits and saying, hey, is this data outdated? Are there new things that we could be considering? And whoever's taken lead on a particular section, you could say, well, I was reading through this and had these thoughts. What do the other commissioners think? Kind of thing. And it just facilitates discussion to see, well, where do we want to go with this?
Okay.
And then based on all that feedback, the lead can take that and incorporate those comments, and then we do another review.
Yeah, I mean, generally, we've sort of worked on our own, shared the document out, come in, everybody gives their sort of, we project it up here, everybody gives their feedback based on what they've read ahead, or as we go through the document, you take it back and then it kind of comes up. So like I've already done, natural history, natural resources, but it's going to come back up for sort of a second.
And that's because you spent a lot of time with this pre-existing committee who's been
Yeah.
thinking about this for years.
Yeah, but I don't think that discussion in March, I assume that's why it's stacked with your other things, is because it's a second go and there's not going to be, it's mostly good to go already.
Right.
It's not a lot of changes to be put into it.
But like Perry, I think you did childcare, right?
Period.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as that went, you looked at it, you made some suggestions, we talked about it, went back and made some revisions. Like some things might.
Exactly, because some of these were all a few years old, and if nothing massive has changed in kind of our views, I've made a couple of suggestions, but also as a town, what kind of change could we really, make outside of some generic suggestions, right? Whereas policy set from the state level. So it was not a tremendous amount of changes, and just really making sure that everybody on the commission was on the same page with what was in the existing documents, just make sure nobody had any big issues.
The bonus is that a lot of really smart people have done a lot of work 5 years ago and 5 years ago before that, and so you're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants in the sense that you're just really tweaking and tuning and pairing. Some things you look at it, because I'll read it and be like, I think we've already done this, and you're like, Dean, we did that 2 years ago. Like, okay, we can take that out. It's something that was proposed to be done. And it might be something about a Webster Road bike path is desired or something, and you're like, we built that. Great.
I also, since Susanna's new, just point out that there are a couple of aspects of the law to keep in mind that go toward explaining, well, why does the document have what it has right now? There's the requirement for the plan element. So as I was showing you before, housing element, recommended program for addressing low and moderate income persons' housing needs, et cetera. There's also a series of planning goals that are in the statute, and we're supposed to try to address those goals. So another factor that's driving the content is the goal, and so we see here more language having to do with housing, and so it fleshes out what it is the sections are supposed to deal with. Anyway, just wanted to remind folks that, yeah, we have the section requirements, and then there are the goals, and it's helpful to know that.
Which in all of that might even be a good segue into the collaboration approach framework.
Yep. Yes.
Which, this was more just to, from a scheduling standpoint, and this ties back to that chart of when we were going to talk about things, to say, so the general methodology is if we have a meeting on like say this Thursday, then Dean will have sent out the packets for this Thursday last Friday. So in order to make sure that contents gets into that packets that everybody can review and then discuss on Thursday, the edits to a section, for example, or any new content should be delivered to Dean prior to that Friday, which Thursday.
Although, I mean, I would raise the slight objection that in the world of Google Docs, having to have something frozen and sent to Dean and then turned into a dead tree copy that's then emailed to us is slightly crazy, versus saying, here's the link, here's the document, and then it precludes you. I mean, you can keep working on it, but you kind of have to work on it in a way that,
Yeah, some of this was driven by Dick's concern, if I'm not mistaken, about things coming really
It
late.
was.
And
Yeah, and very, very valid, and,
Yeah.
and I'm with you because I think Google Docs offers a lot of things, but there was,
and that way we're all writing and editing and commenting on the same doc, so that as you're at home making notes on your dead tree version that you then come to the meeting to discuss. I mean, I guess there's open meeting law issues around what you're collaborating on a doc, but
Yeah.
it just feels like it could be a lot more efficient.
yeah, well, just 2 cents around all of that. I think from a packet perspective, I think this is important. I think that Google Docs gives us the additional benefit that whatever, like let's say you're
after
working on
that
a section, right? So you get your edits to Dean on Thursday. He gets them into the packets and they're distributed, and everybody can look at those. Not everybody's going to go online and look at that section, but as part of everything else in the packet, they'll go through and make their edits and their comments and that sort of thing. If people wanted to, they could go in, and this is what we were talking about, just having, like you may have edit authority over the section that you're editing,
Yeah.
but if everybody else has comments open, available, then if they happen to be reading it online, they could just do their comments right there, so that when we're reviewing it in the meeting, you can see those comments.
Yeah.
But for anybody who's just reading the print layout, they'll have the core content that you had worked on and delivered Thursday a week earlier.
Right.
That's not to say things couldn't change, but
Yeah, no, I just think I guess you could continue to work on your document even after it's been quote unquote submitted, because you don't want to slow progress of other stuff that needs to happen. But, if you can do it there online and people can get on there, then in the meeting, you can just accept comments and do it. And, it can be done more fluidly, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
in the meeting.
I think it just gets at this idea that if you have the bulk of your work done that 1 week ahead, and the pressure is on people to respond to that, go online and respond to it within a period of time, then when you get to your meeting, the person who's, if there was something that you drafted and I responded to and asked questions, then you can come into the meeting and it's like, boom, you got the response and it's all taken care of, and then it's the next item.
Right.
Rather than, I think, what Dick was concerned about with some other things in the transportation section is like he thought he found out about it at the last minute and he needed more time to respond.
well, and even I think there was a transportation discussion one meeting where the changes were basically presented that day. And
Right.
so not having reviewed it, it's almost like you have to read through it line by line, word by word, and that's
So
not
what-
as efficient.
I mean, I cut you off before you even finished. What you're saying though is that basically, if they get that packet on Friday or Saturday or whatever, that, and they're reviewing it and comments, the comments will come back to that lead to be incorporated before the next meeting.
Well, I mean, ideally, the
I mean,
edits
that's
would,
what I'm reading there. Is that wrong? So in other words, you send it out
Right.
Thursday, we all comment, send it back to the lead author
By
by
Monday.
Monday, and then
I mean, I
that's all
think
incorporated, and we're kind of reviewing what should be a
you
more
all
clean
have
document.
edit privileges. I mean,
Right.
if I'm looking around at my peers and I see that, they're all working on these sections and a section's coming up, and you post your comments on Thursday, and I know I've got the weekend or till Friday or Sunday to get my response, I'll do it online if I can work online. I think the idea of having to like ship them back and forth is really not practical, except for someone who just can't deal with this platform with Google
Right.
Docs.
And to your point, because we talked about this, I think in early December. ha- is this right?
Is this right?
Yeah. So short term, that draft edits proposed and available 1 week before. So we're meeting on the 11th. So if we were reviewing a section today, and I say I was responsible for a section, I would need to have edits to you last Thursday.
You would
That's
have
what
to have
that's
done,
saying,
I mean,
right?
you do your work online. It's just that, basically, if you're,
At some point, Dean shares something with everybody, and the work that you've done is frozen
Right.
Yeah.
in their view at that point.
right, I mean, I'll
Right.
basically PDF the edit view because I can, and that's what I would distribute.
I think I was confused by the second line of commissioner comments due 3 days before.
Okay, well, that would be 3 days, I'm sorry, 3 days, this is all relative to the meeting. So the
Right.
idea
Before
is
the next meeting.
Thursday, it goes, the package goes out. I mean, you've been working on energy, and we're getting close to I'm working on the packets, and it's Thursday, and the packets are gonna go out, and you've done a burst of work on Wednesday and Thursday morning, and it's all there. I PDF that version and I make it in the packets, and everybody knows it's Thursday, so Jason's work on transportation or energy is up. And then they have 3 days to respond to it, and then you would see, to go back 3 days later. If you've just kind of
Oh, I see. Right.
and then we get to the meeting, and it would have been a week since you got your burst done and the package was sent out, and then 3 days since people have given their reaction to it. My guess is in most cases there won't be a lot of reaction. But
Right. Okay.
there's
So
something
most reaction would probably be during the meeting, but for those who are motivated and are looking at it online and commenting real time,
Yeah,
that
and-
gives the.
I mean, and I thought your intention was is that we really want people not to just wait to the meeting, because if your
Agreed.
comments are done on Thursday, have the reaction to them before you get to the meeting so that you can address them, and then at the meeting it's done. It's really making intensive use of that time in between.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a little bit of a let the process soak in a little bit as
Sure,
people get used
absolutely.
to using Google Docs. But I think there's a big opportunity there.
But even it can work with hard copies too, right? So Dean mails it on Thursday. We'll use Dick as the example. He gets it. He has until Monday to mark it up with red pen, write things down. But then he's got to send all that back, or
Yeah, I mean,
via an email, or he's got to go back into the doc and add
right.
comments in the doc. I mean, I don't know if we're.
I mean, the thing is that when I do the mailing and I do this, when I issue this material, it goes out by the postal service mail. The paper copy is going to eat up all this time, but then I make the PDF version, and that's what I would imagine people will respond to.
Got it.
And for those who will go online and make those comments, that's great. I think in that example, in Dick's case example, yeah, if he had red line comments together by Monday and can go back in and take a look at it, in that case of energy, if I would know, hey, I'll just keep checking on that document or have notifications turned on or something so that I can address them. But otherwise, worst case, we address it on Thursday, but everybody's seen the content. I think the bigger issue was that we had some examples where we showed up to a meeting and got copies that night of the changes and nobody had read it. So we had to take extra time to actually read through it there, and just nobody had the preview.
Right.
So it was
Right, 'cause
looking to
people- I
avoid
mean, that's what I'm
that.
saying is that you submit it on a Thursday, but you might actually, you're not done, and you keep tuning and tweaking,
Right,
and then when you get to the meeting, we're reacting. People are reading a frozen snapshot in
Right,
time.
but you're not going to overhaul the section. Like that is the gist
Right.
of what you're going to be working with.
But that's why my
Okay.
argument would be we don't ever have a dead tree copy that gets sent out. We just say,
Go online.
go online and look at the
And if
edits
people are ready to say that,
that
that's-
they've made.
I
and
think
then
that's the hurdle.
I'd
Yeah,
rather
if we were all ready to do that, yeah, absolutely. I just
because it's
I don't
more
know.
real time, it's faster.
Right.
You're not waiting for a copy. I mean,
I-
that's what. So when I did it, when I think it was Dick and Perry did one of the ones they shared, I just was like, can I just go into the doc? That's why I asked you for permission. I was
Yeah.
like, I'd rather do it there, and then
Yeah.
they can be like, no, dumb comment, or yeah, good point, or whatever,
Right.
and they could accept, reject.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, you have, right, and I think we switched over to that where,
Yeah,
give
we now
out
have-
the edit privileges.
Yeah, we probably need to hook Susanna up with.
I do. I mean,
Yeah.
I've emailed her more times already in the last 3 days that I've,
Your new best friend.
oh, here's another email, and here's another one, and yeah, I haven't even told her about the online, fill this out to let us know what your availability is for the next year, you know, that link is coming.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Subject to change.
Yeah, right.
Revision and review.
A week in advance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say that that'll continue to evolve. The end game, though, is exactly what you're talking about. If
Yeah.
we can just get to a point where we can just real time be updating these things, and then as far as the open meeting law goes, is there was the idea of once a document gets to a certain state, it could be public for view only.
Yeah, well, the way it is right now is that and I had a conversation with Kyle Bergeron, who's the youngest member of the Natural Resources Committee, and is probably a lot more Google Docs savvy than anybody else in that room. But the solution that we've worked out temporarily is that we have a published version, and that link is what anybody in the public can see, and that's updated every 5 minutes. So that shows the current state of the document as it's edited. So it would be it's the simple view version. You don't see any of the editing history, but it's the simple view version, and that's on the website.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
I think
The format's a little bit different, but it's there.
So the question marks don't have a lead person.
Right, and that's yes. And so, are you
how
volunteering?
you feeling?
I'm wondering if I can put my hand up next meeting once I have a chance to orient myself a little bit more. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Take some time and feel
Take a
free
look
to.
I need to read.
I'm
this.
happy
a
to
look at
answer
those
whatever I
sections, too.
can, and I know Dean is.
Public Works
on
and
top of everything.
Stormwater doesn't have a.
Well, public works and stormwater, and maybe that's the perfect
that the
segue,
Yeah.
into some of the stuff I was going to show here. The way the plan is structured currently, we have a section on growth and development. And then underneath that, we have the policies about population growth. We have the policies related to economic development. And then we have the policies related to this mega category, community facilities, utilities, services. Dick and Perry were focusing on the population and economic development piece. And I thought there had been an understanding that this is something that wasn't necessarily in their wheelhouse. This is so that's the short of it. There's a lot of ground that can be covered by this, but some of the policies, you know, once you've established a policy that says the level of growth in the town shouldn't overwhelm the availability of services, you know, it'll apply to water and sewer and wastewater, you know, all those things. But right now, I don't see it as having a lead person.
And how does like towers and telecom, is that tied in as part of community utilities, facilities, and services, or it's
It hasn't been
Okay.
because that section came about on its own later, and it's just plopped in as a new section.
can we munge those two together?
It could
I mean, towers and telecom could be a subsection of that. I mean, what else is in that?
What else is in community facilities and utilities?
Community utilities.
It's, yeah, I
facility.
mean, it's normally, well, with the addition of stormwater, it's going to be water, sewer, libraries, management. I mean, it covers a lot of topics. If you look in volume 2, you'll see that we have information about the fire department and fire calls, the police station and police calls, water usage, wastewater treatment usage.
Right.
So it's a lot of stuff, and now we'll potentially include stormwater and the management of stormwater. So it's a lot of things.
So it's kind of all public services.
And yes, where I was going to go with that is that the distinction, I think that's something to consider, is that it is the town's services. We'll talk in volume 2. We'll talk briefly about the fact that who provides cable. It's private. Who provides electricity? Well, it's a public utility, but it's not the town. Towers and telecom are the same thing, although it's a little bit weird because we rent space on our water tower for cell phone providers. So
Right.
it does mix.
Yeah. I like the way these guys did it in Essex, which is this whole section called serving the community, and then very discrete sections underneath. I mean, that would mean reordering some pieces we might have there, but
Yeah.
I think it's more logical.
And the thing about the towers and telecommunications facility section, it's relatively new, and it's really there. It's not a statutory requirement, and it's really there in response to concerns about
Right.
something. So
Yep.
it has a stance.
Yes.
So we'll be waiting till next meeting, unless there are any other assignments.
What is natural resources, including on this thing, H blocks, etc.?
Well, the statute has expanded, so habitat,
Habitat blocks?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And there's also a flood resiliency requirement that was not really addressed, and something I've been kind of floating out there is, are we seeing that as, part of the Natural Resources Committee's responsibility? I think it's a good place to start. But that's a new requirement. So to encourage flood resilient communities, this number 14 is new.
Okay.
And we have maybe one statement in the plan that we could say is directed towards that, and there really should be more.
So in terms of desired approach for public works and stormwater. was-
Okay, so the thing I was just going to flip through there a little bit. I guess this ties back to the discussion of volume 2. I think something that people need to be thinking about is the kind of information that you find in volume 2 that documents the trends in fire calls and police calls and different types of crime, is that stuff interesting and useful, and should we do it? And those are the kinds of things that traditionally the department heads have been responsible for. They update that information. They also update us with the information that we have that describes what the facilities are. These plans typically will say, well, what's the inventory of fire trucks? And so we now have a new fire truck, so we're going to need to mention the Quinn. The policy section, though, gets to the stuff that I'm about to show you here. Like I say, it's currently part of growth and development, a lot of detailed information in volume 2, lots of staff involvement. I'm encouraging you as a commission to retain your role as the major policy setters for this. The generic framework for doing this kind of planning is you inventory, you know what your service areas are, you know basically what the supply of that service is. You understand the level of demand on it. That's where that information about whether or not usage is growing is important. It's good to know, for example, that water usage is actually, it's depressed. We could sell a lot more water. It would help our system in terms of finances. So the level of use of water is not terribly strong. We could use more users. We also tend to look
But it
at,
also is limiting, it's a limiting growth factor now, right? With Quinny and all that stuff in terms of working out this backup water supply. And
well, there's,
so-
that's an example of what I am alluding to when I say I think the commission should at least consider setting some policies or floating, right? You know, we have a weird situation with water because we have a select board and we have a water commission and they're responsible, but you folks are the folks who prepare the comprehensive plan, and you could get the input from a lot of different folks. But if you think that a certain policy about water usage is going to be most beneficial in terms of the overall growth of the plan, I think you need to promote that policy. The thing with Quinniasca is this really peculiar situation that has to do with backup sources of water.
Right,
And there's just a big disagreement about paying for that.
right.
So it all comes down to what are the implications for growth? You either have too much of a service or not enough, it costs too much, or it's in, shoddy supply. The thing that you look at our plan, what do people want in Shelburne? They demand high quality services, and we have them. It's just that it's tougher and tougher to provide them at a low and affordable cost. So things to think about. They have an impact on the ability to grow. It's really important for people to understand, I believe, the difference between the average demand and the peak demand. Things like our wastewater system, there's an ongoing kind of average demand, but we also have big spikes in connection with storms because of infiltration, and we're trying to plan the system to deal with those. It's really expensive. It wears out.
Yeah.
And a lot of what's happening, and this is where I go back to stormwater, is because of regulations. We've had requirements in our subdivision bylaws for stormwater management, but they were for years, but they weren't written with the kind of mindset that now is in effect about how we manage stormwater. And I'll talk about stormwater a little bit more, but I think that, the language that I quote here is that the statute says the plan can include indications of priority of need. And that's really where I think that the Planning Commission's perspective on these services is valuable, indicating what the priority of need is from the standpoint of the overall growth of the town. Just going on to stormwater, it's a little bit different because we're just so focused on responding to the permit requirements that we have and these laws. It's also a bit different because it's all watershed based, and it's also complicated by the fact that part of our stormwater system is really part of our road system. It's the ditches and things alongside the road, so it's embedded in highways, and those are public, but then there's also a private component. All these private developments that have their own stormwater systems, and some of them work and some of them don't, and it gets really, really complicated. The regulatory piece is there, and by that bullet, regulatory objectives and property owner objectives typically run counter to each other. I mean, if you're a property owner, you typically want the water to go away. The regulations want the water to stay. And so it's really going to make for some interesting policy discussions. The regulatory hammer, again, this is very, very narrow, but what our policies are supposed to be doing is two seemingly contradictory things, and that is we want to bring down the peaks and we want to bring up the lowest flows. And so there's a document called the Flow Restoration Plan that whoever works on this will probably pull a lot of information from, that was prepared in response to these obligations. And it's basically an effort to say, well, where could we do projects that will bring down the peaks and bring up the minimum flows? So there is a fairly significant source document for stuff that would be both volume 2-ish and volume 1-ish. Anyway, it's just kind of a real quick immersion into that whole realm. And, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, the executive summary you included in there as well was kind of good background. I think good observation around the public-private, and I could see things like things that we could put into recommended actions just to, like, it would be good to have in a town plan to address those types of topics. Not that we'd be regulating it or creating laws in the plan, obviously, but to set some level of guidance.
Yeah, and I should have said this. I can't believe it wasn't included in one of the bullets. The other big endeavor is the creation of a stormwater utility. And that's another big effort that's underway.
And what, didn't we have that in one of the sections as a recommended action to investigate, or there was some reference to a stormwater utility, I thought.
I think there was, although I don't recall where it was exactly.
And that would be countywide
Well,
or like
we're still
drainage
working on
wide?
it. The select board created a stormwater advisory committee that's working on a few different facets of this. I think at one time there was this idea that Shelburne would graft on to the utility in South Burlington. I think now it's understood that we wouldn't really be able to do that. We would create our own utility. Long term, maybe there will be regional utilities, but not right now, because it just makes it really even more complicated.
I mean, just from a ecological standpoint, right? You really want to look at it from a drainage and a basin standpoint,
Yeah.
not town. I mean,
Right.
Yeah,
should be
we're
regional.
responding, we're responding to requirements that are dealing with the quality of water in Lake Champlain and in the
Yeah.
individual streams too. But
Monroe
yeah, you're
Road.
right. It's just that the permit obligations go town to town. And so we're on the hook. And so I think it would be really challenging if the permit obligations went to an entire territory that was governed by one body, then it might not be as difficult. But if we were to enter into a utility with South Burlington, you can bet that the residents, as they pay into it, are going to want the benefits comparable or proportional to the money that they put in.
Yeah.
And so I think that that'll be really complicated, more complicated than just setting up our own.
Yeah.
And the thing about a utility is it's really it's a payment system. It's a way of raising the money.
Right.
And
And
you'd
the
almost,
projects are going to be from this restoration plan.
to your point, because it is a more regional type thing, you'd almost want to get to a point where you have like something where this could be handled by the regional planning commission, but have a town's plan be like address certain points similar to energy, so that there could be a substantial deference or a a bigger voice at the table if your town's plan conforms to these sorts of directions.
Yeah. That's
That's not an overnight kind of thing, but
yeah.
just a thought.
Yeah.
And I'm mindful of time. I know if you need to go, no worries. All right, I think we're in the home stretch. Are we? Is this a? Perry, did you have a comment?
No, I was just listening. I didn't have a specific comment. No.
Yeah, right on. So then, any other updates?
Any other updates under 8? No. I did have some just things to mention under 9 or other 10
Sure.
future topics.
What about, looks like housing's the unassigned thing that comes up fastest.
Yep. And
And who was working on that before? Was that a Jamie thing? Or was that unassigned?
I just
think it
don't
was
think
an
it was
unassigned.
assigned.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'll take that, I guess. For needs an owner, right?
Awesome.
it would be
Yeah. And I can work with the housing
subcommittee.
subcommittee as,
Yeah, I mean,
needed.
I would encourage you to touch base with John, Ron, and just get his reaction to. They're pretty focused on the other stuff,
Hamlets.
but I would say
what's
touch
Ron's?
Ron Bouchard.
Bouchard. Okay.
Yes, or I guess maybe even just taking a look at the section and any preliminary edits. I know that they are pretty heavy into Hamlets right now.
Yeah, I'm just knowing who if I have a question or whatever, knowing that those guys might know
Sure.
because some of them have been on the planning commission in the past, right?
No, certainly.
Yeah.
Are we good with this for tonight,
I think so.
for now? And then we can do other assignments next time?
Yeah.
So as far as commissioner comments and questions, I know you have stuff under other business. I wanted to just after Jamie moved on and being acting chair and not having a formal vice chair, I wanted to nominate an acting vice chair at least until we get through to April. And if there weren't any objections, I wanted to nominate Andrew. I suppose I'll nominate and ask if there are any other. Well, A, are you willing?
Willing.
Awesome. And then B, are there any objections or comments or other nominations? All right. Well,
Because your schedule has you away, and you know that's
I'm
coming up.
currently away the next time, and I know that we could do one off somebody just run it, and I didn't want to gum things up, so I definitely would like at least an acting vice chair so that we can formalize as we move
Right,
forward.
because that's January 28th.
22nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th.
25th.
25th.
Yeah,
And you are.
I will be
You're
out.
definitely away.
Well,
Okay.
4 hours ago I was going to be here, and then 3 hours ago I was not. So again,
It could change.
so it could change again. But yeah, does that need to be formal, or is that a statement?
No, I think that the way that you handle it is fine, and that, like you said, just wait until the post town meeting reassembly
Where
stuff,
it can be official.
and you have your normal process.
Okay.
Because it's really just to, know that someone is going to chair, give Andrew the ability to maybe participate in the discussion that we have about the agenda, and we
Yeah,
just get everything
absolutely.
set up, and it doesn't blindside him, where we say, guess what?
Yeah, I'm honestly just a little concerned with the way some things are going in professional world that I may need some assistance. So then,
Assistance with what?
just like when I'll meet with Dean and we talk about the agenda and that sort of thing, just having another set of eyes or somebody in the
Yeah,
loop,
fair
just in
enough.
case something happens short notice.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
'Cause I don't want to leave you hanging.
Sounds good.
So the
business?
I want to just mention that as far as upcoming agenda items, including the next meeting and things other than the comprehensive plan, anticipate a couple of things having to do with zoning, at least a couple of things. You will recall that the folks from the new owners of Quiniesca came, and I have done a little bit of back and forth with David Marshall, and we've just been in this kind of weird cycle because we didn't have quorums. But I would want you to know that there will be a zoning header on the agenda, and it would likely include time to talk about Quiniesca. There's one property that I didn't mention here that's called Halverson. They'll probably have their attorney here representing. That is a property owner who's made an application to the DRB. It was denied. He appealed, but rather than continuing with the appeal, the select board has said, try to approach the planning commission about an amendment. And there is I believe, a relatively simple amendment that would solve the problem. And then a bigger zoning topic, that's form-based zoning. The consultant who'd been working with us has essentially wrapped up her work. She has submitted her final invoice. I'm having some conversations with the Regional Planning Commission, but the commission will need to spend a little bit of time trying to figure out, what do you want to do? It's an important one for Kate to be here for. But anyway, heads up. Neighborhood development areas is something that I'll explain in more detail, but it's one of those designations. Back a while ago, we were talking about how the plan has these designations in them. The state has programs where if you achieve a certain designation, the owners of property in those areas get certain benefits. Our plan says we want to try to retain those benefits. One of those designations that we have is expiring. I thought several months ago that we would just renew it. Well, you can't renew it. You have to convert it into a new kind. Things are a lot more complicated. I'm going to be explaining to you how I don't believe it's the end of the world if we let it expire, because we're going to have to go through a new process anyway. And the more important thing is that the potential beneficiaries of this designation right now on the horizon would seem to be most likely the folks that live in the mobile home park. That's not an area that has this designation right now. So rather than us or you trying to figure out, well, let's do this new designation of this new area and where should it go, the law gives individual property owners a chance to take the lead. And so I think that, long story short, it could be a case where we'll just say, you guys take the lead and then work with the planning commission, and then the designation will work, cooperatively, but you won't have to be taking the lead on it. And it doesn't mean that it's the only area in town that's designated under this new designation. It just means that it's the first one, or could. Anyway, that's neighborhood development areas.
Good deal. I think we're it, right?
Motion to
Motion
adjourn,
to
Mr.
adjourn?
Chairman?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Third. Let's give it to Perry.
Right.
Thanks, Perry.
All right. Well, meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Hey, thanks, Perry, for dialing in.
Like with
He's
these.
gone. He's
Gone
gone.
already.